All right, so today we're going to unpack one of the most iconic journeys in American history.
Yeah,
We're talking Lewis and Clark.
of course.
But not just the discovering new lands part that you usually hear about.
Right, right.
This deep dive, we're going beyond the textbook version.
Yeah.
Using an episode of the American History Tellers podcast
Oh, cool.
as our guide. And
Okay.
you ready to experience the grit, the danger, the almost unbelievable challenges they
Man,
faced?
it's fascinating how this source really gets into the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah.
It's not just about charting territory.
Right.
We're talking sheer survival against incredible odds.
It makes you wonder, if you were suddenly transported back in time,
Oh, yeah.
dropped into their shoes,
Oh.
would you even last a week?
Right.
And speaking of challenges,
Yeah.
how about starting with something that will really grab your attention?
Okay.
Like their encounters with grizzly bears.
Oh, yeah.
I
Those
mean-
are always a good time.
Oh my God.
The way the podcast describes their first run-in with a grizzly is just incredible.
Yeah.
These guys are out hunting. They think they're going to have an easy time with this bear.
Right.
And bam, reality hits hard.
They thought they could make short work of it, carrying 4 shots.
Yeah.
But the bear doesn't go down. It charges.
Oh, wow.
They end up jumping into the Missouri River.
Oh, my God.
A bear's swimming after them.
Are you serious?
Talk about a wake-up call.
It really exposes the misconceptions they had about the wilderness.
Right.
They were prepared for hardship,
Yeah.
but the sheer ferocity of these grizzlies was something else entirely.
Yeah.
Do you think this experience changed them? I mean, psychologically?
Oh, yeah.
Did it shift their whole perspective on the dangers ahead?
I think it had to.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the adrenaline rush,
Yeah.
the feeling of being hunted.
Uh-huh.
It probably made all the other challenges seem a bit less daunting.
Yeah, I guess so.
But danger wasn't limited to wildlife encounters.
Oh, of course not.
Their maps only went so far, and then they were literally on their own,
Wow.
charting the unknown.
Think about the pressure of that.
I know.
No map, no GPS, just your wits and observations to guide you.
It's crazy.
They reached the edge of their map and essentially stepped into a blank slate.
Right.
Every decision had huge consequences.
Like when they come across a fork in the Missouri River,
Oh, yeah.
2 branches and no way to know for sure which one to take. I can't even imagine the weight of that decision.
Right.
What were they looking for? I mean, how did they even begin to choose?
It's amazing how resourceful they were.
Yeah.
They studied the water clarity,
Mhm.
the types of rock formations, anything that might give them a clue.
Wow.
They were scientists and explorers,
Yeah.
but they were also incredibly intuitive, relying on gut feelings as much as hard data.
But even with all that, there were still close calls.
Oh, I'm sure.
Remember what happened to Private Richard Windsor?
No.
So he's walking along the riverbank, rain starts pouring the ground, turns to mud,
Oh, no.
and suddenly he loses his footing.
Oh, my gosh.
Starts sliding down this steep embankment towards the river,
Yeah.
a 90-foot drop onto rocks.
Oh, that's terrifying.
It would have been certain death.
Wow.
But thankfully, Captain Lewis was there.
Oh, good.
He kept his cool talked Windsor through finding footholds,
Wow.
inch by inch.
Talk about leadership under pressure.
Right.
Not only does this show how treacherous the terrain was,
Yeah,
but it also solidified the men's trust in Lewis.
for sure.
That bond was going to be crucial for what lay ahead.
And what lay ahead was quite literally breathtaking.
What was it?
We're talking about the Great Falls of the Missouri,
Okay.
inscribed as the grandest sight Lewis had ever seen.
Wow.
5 massive waterfalls cascading down cliffs.
It's hard to reconcile that stunning beauty
I know.
with the logistical nightmare they faced.
Yeah.
Think about it. Tons of supplies to haul across rough terrain.
Right.
New canoes to build because the old boats were too big.
Uh-huh.
And all this while summer was slipping away.
They were racing against time, weren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That sense of urgency must have been palpable.
Right.
They knew they needed to cross the Rocky Mountains before winter.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, they needed something the Great Falls couldn't provide.
Horses.
Horses, exactly.
Which is what led them to the Shoshone people, right?
Right.
The Shoshone held the key to their success.
Mhm.
Not just horses, but knowledge of the mountain passes,
Yeah.
potential food sources. It's
Yep.
like they hit this massive roadblock,
Yeah.
and the Shoshones were the only ones who could help them get past it.
Right.
But finding them wasn't exactly a walk in the park, was it?
Not at all. Imagine Lewis trying to signal a Shoshone boy on horseback using a blanket.
Yeah, I can just picture it, Lewis waving this blanket,
Well-
thinking he's speaking a universal language of friendship.
Yeah. Except Shoshone had their own signals, their own culture.
Of course.
The boy bolts thinking it's an ambush.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a cultural disconnect. It shows how even the simplest interactions could turn into high-stakes situations.
And those stakes got even higher when they encountered a Shoshone war party.
Oh, really?
60 warriors charging towards them.
Oh, my God.
Lewis and his men completely outnumbered.
How did they even manage to avoid a full-blown conflict?
It all boils down to those small moments of connection.
Okay.
Remember Sacagawea?
Yes.
She was a Shoshone woman who had been kidnapped.
Right.
And later married Toussaint Charbonneau,
Mm-hmm.
a French-Canadian fur trader traveling with the expedition.
Okay.
She recognized Chief Kamehameha as her brother.
Wow.
That one familial connection completely changed the dynamic, didn't it?
It's incredible how personal histories intertwine with the fate of the entire expedition.
Yeah.
But even with Sacagawea's intervention, things weren't easy.
Of course not.
The Shoshone had been exploited and attacked by other white people.
Right.
Why should they trust this group?
Yeah.
Negotiating for horses for safe passage? It must have been incredibly tense.
I'm sure.
With a lot of suspicion on both sides.
Right.
It makes you realize that for the Shoshone, the arrival of Lewis and Clark wasn't just some grand adventure.
Right.
It was a potential threat to their way of life.
And on top of that, Lewis got some news that must have rocked his world.
Oh, is that?
Remember that all-water route to the Pacific
Yeah.
that Jefferson was so sure of?
Mm.
Well, it might not have existed.
Oh, wow.
This was a major blow to their mission, wasn't it?
It was a huge setback.
Yeah.
But they had come so far, endured so much,
Yeah.
they had no choice but to press on.
So with a fresh set of horses,
Yeah.
a Shoshone guide named Old Toby,
Okay.
and a whole lot of uncertainty,
Uh-huh.
they set off into the daunting Bitterroot Mountains.
Wow.
This is where the real test of their resilience begins.
And that's where we'll pick things up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Lewis and Clark expedition. When we left off, they were heading into the Bitterroot Mountains with a fresh set of horses, thanks to the Shoshone, but facing a whole new set of uncertainties. The source really paints a vivid picture of this leg of the journey.
It's one thing to read about steep slopes, fallen timber, dwindling food supplies,
Yeah.
but to imagine actually experiencing that day after day while winter is closing in, that's next-level hardship.
And remember, they were relying on portable soup, this early version of bouillon, as a main source of sustenance. It's hard to imagine they're providing much energy for the kind of physical exertion they were facing.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling how they kept going.
Makes you wonder about the psychological toll, too. How do you maintain morale when you're cold, hungry, exhausted, and surrounded by such a vast and unforgiving landscape?
That's where leadership really comes into play. Not just from Lewis and Clark, but from individuals like Sergeant Patrick Gass.
Oh, yeah?
He took meticulous notes throughout the journey, which provide incredible insights into their daily lives.
I see. What stands out to me is how he describes the importance of keeping busy, of focusing on the tasks at hand as a way to cope with the mental strain.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If you let yourself dwell on the enormity of the situation, the danger, the uncertainty, it would be easy to just give up.
Right.
But they had a mission, and they were determined to see it through.
And even amidst those incredibly challenging circumstances, they encountered moments of unexpected grace.
Yeah.
Think about their encounter with the Nez Perce tribe.
Right. At first, the Nez Perce were wary, calling them hairy beasts.
Oh, wow.
You can't really blame them, can you?
Oh.
Imagine seeing these strangers with their strange clothes and weapons suddenly appearing in your homeland.
It speaks to the power of individual connection that they were able to bridge that cultural divide. A Nez Perce woman named Watuis had actually lived with white people before, and she convinced her tribe to help Lewis and Clark's group.
I'm curious about Watuis. Do we know anything more about her? What was her experience living with white people like? It's incredible to think that her past played such a pivotal role in the expedition's success.
Unfortunately, the source doesn't delve too deeply into her personal history, but it does highlight the importance of her role as a translator and cultural mediator. She helped to establish trust and communication between the two groups, which was absolutely essential for the expedition's survival at that point.
It's a reminder that even in the most remote and challenging environments, human connection can make all the difference. So thanks to the Nez Perce, they were able to recover, build new canoes, and continue their journey towards the Pacific.
And what a journey it was.
Oh, yeah.
They faced treacherous rapids on the Columbia River, particularly a section known as the Short Narrows.
Uh-huh.
The source describes it as a raging torrent, the channel narrowed to just a few yards wide, with whirlpools and swells everywhere. Just picturing it makes my heart race.
I can only imagine what it was like to actually navigate that in a canoe. It must have felt like staring death in the face.
Well, in a way, they were. They relied on their most experienced waterman, Private Pierre Cruzat, to guide them through. He was known for his skill and his calm under pressure, and apparently he had a bit of a flair for the dramatic, too.
Oh, tell me more.
The source describes him standing on a slippery rock, waves crashing over him as he assessed the situation. The local Chinook tribe had gathered to watch, and you could almost picture Cruzat with his long hair flying, paddling like a madman, navigating this churning water. He not only had to get himself through safely, but lead the way for all the other canoes.
Talk about pressure.
He somehow managed to pull it off. And the Chinooks were impressed, to say the least. It was a testament to their skill, their courage, and their sheer determination.
Navigating the rapids was just one challenge. They still had to deal with the Chinook tribe, and that turned out to be a whole other story.
From what we discussed earlier, the Chinooks were much more savvy traders than the Nez Perce, who had helped them purely out of generosity.
Yeah, exactly. The Chinook had been interacting with British fur traders for years. They knew the value of their goods and services, and they weren't about to give anything away for free.
Right.
So instead of bartering with beads and trinkets, the expedition had to pay a much higher price for what they needed, right?
Unfortunately, yes, they were forced to rely on dog meat as their main source of food, which, as you can imagine, was not a popular choice.
I'm trying to imagine what that must have been like, not just the taste, but the psychological aspect of it.
Yeah.
Here they are, these explorers facing all these hardships, and now they have to eat dog meat to survive.
It's crazy.
It really underscores the level of sacrifice and adaptation they had to endure.
It also highlights the clash of cultures, the differing values and beliefs they encountered along the way. For the Chinook, dog meat was a common food source, but for Lewis and Clark and their men, it was a stark reminder of just how far they were from home, how different this world was from anything they'd ever known.
It makes their accomplishments even more remarkable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They were constantly pushing their own boundaries, physically and mentally, to achieve their goal. And speaking of their goal, the Pacific Ocean was now tantalizingly close.
That moment when they finally caught sight of the Pacific, or at least the estuary where the Columbia River meets the sea, must have been incredible. To think of all they had overcome, all the miles they had covered, the dangers they had faced. And there it was, the vast expanse of the Pacific.
It's hard to imagine what emotions they must have felt. Relief, exhilaration, maybe even a touch of disbelief. But reaching the Pacific was just one milestone in their epic journey.
Absolutely. Getting there was only half the battle. They still had to survive the winter, rebuild their strength, and figure out how to make their way back across thousands of miles of wilderness. And that return journey, as we'll discover in the next part of our deep dive, presented its own set of challenges and surprises.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Lewis and Clark expedition. We left off with them reaching the Pacific, a monumental achievement, no doubt. But as we know, reaching their destination was only half the story.
Right.
What about the journey back?
It's interesting, because on the surface, you might think, okay, they did it once, going back should be easier.
Yeah.
But the reality is the return trip was just as challenging, if not more so.
Really?
They were depleted physically and mentally,
Right.
and now facing a whole new set of uncertainties.
I guess there's no undo button on an expedition like that.
Nope.
You can't just teleport back to St. Louis.
Exactly.
They were facing a long, hard slog back through the wilderness.
Yeah.
And they couldn't exactly retrace their steps perfectly, could they?
Not really, no.
The seasons had changed, rivers might have different water levels, and the tribes they'd encountered might not be as welcoming the second time around.
Exactly. It wasn't just a matter of following the same path. And on top of that, they were dealing with a looming winter.
Oh, yeah.
Dwindling supplies and the psychological weight of knowing they weren't home free yet.
Their time on the coast wasn't exactly a relaxing break either, was it?
No, not at all. They landed in late fall. Rainy season was setting. And they had to build a fort. Prepare for a harsh winter on the Oregon coast. I'm picturing endless rain, freezing temperatures, the constant threat of illness, plus those tensions with the Chinook tribe didn't just disappear, did they?
The Chinooks were shrewd negotiators.
Ah, yeah.
And they saw the expedition's need for supplies as a bargaining chip.
Of course.
They started raising prices, demanding more for food and other essentials. It's understandable from their point of view. They'd been interacting with European traders for years.
Right.
They knew how this game was played. It
Yeah.
must have been incredibly frustrating for Lewis and Clark.
I bet.
They couldn't afford to alienate the Chinook. They needed their cooperation to survive. But they also couldn't be seen as weak or easily manipulated. How did they navigate that delicate balance?
It seems they walked a tightrope,
Yeah.
trying to maintain a semblance of peace while also asserting their authority. The source mentions incidents of theft from the expedition's camp, suspicions that the Chinooks were plotting against them. It was a constant source of anxiety. Imagine being stuck in that damp fort, winter storms raging outside,
Wow, yeah.
surrounded by a tribe you don't entirely trust, thousands of miles from home. Talk about psychological pressure.
It's a side of the story we don't often hear about. We tend to focus on the grand adventures, the discoveries. But those quieter moments of tension, uncertainty, and fear, they were just as much a part of the expedition's reality.
I agree.
And through it all, Lewis was still holding on to that hope of finding a more direct route back east, wasn't he?
He was, and remember, he'd always been skeptical of the all-water route.
Uh-huh.
So while the rest of the group was prepping for the return journey, he decided to go on a side expedition to explore the Marias River. He thought it might offer a quicker path and hoped to make contact with the Blackfeet tribe known for their fierce warriors and valuable furs.
It's amazing how even after all they'd been through, Lewis still had that drive to explore, to push the boundaries of what was known, but this side mission didn't exactly go smoothly, did it?
Unfortunately, no. Lewis and his small group, including George Drouillard, ran into a group of Blackfeet warriors. Tensions escalated quickly. There was a dispute over a stolen gun, and it ended in a violent confrontation.
So much for peaceful diplomacy.
I know.
It's a reminder that even with the best intentions, cultural misunderstandings and fear can quickly turn deadly.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Several Blackfeet warriors were killed, and Lewis's group had to flee for their lives. It was a tragic event that had lasting repercussions, shattering any hope of building positive relations with the Blackfeet and reinforcing the image of white explorers as invaders.
A dark chapter in an already complex story. So with that side mission ending tragically, the main expedition began their long journey back east. What were some of the biggest challenges they faced on that return trip?
Well, they faced many of the same hardships as before: harsh weather, difficult terrain, dwindling food supplies.
Right.
But now they had the added pressure of time.
Oh, yeah.
They were racing against the changing seasons, knowing that winter could catch them in the mountains, which would be disastrous. They relied heavily on hunting and foraging.
Right.
But those sources were unpredictable, and they were all no doubt exhausted and eager to get home.
It's incredible how they kept going. It makes you think about what drove them, what fueled their resilience.
Yeah.
Was it simply a sense of duty, or was there something more?
I think it was a combination of factors: duty to their mission, loyalty to each other, and perhaps a stubborn refusal to give up after coming so far.
Right.
They faced moments of despair, for sure,
Right.
but they also found ways to celebrate small victories, to find joy in the midst of hardship.
What really stands out to me is that they weren't just focused on survival, they were still observing, collecting specimens, documenting the world around them, even when they were cold, tired, and hungry. That scientific curiosity never waned.
That's a testament to their dedication and their passion for the task at hand. They weren't just explorers, they were scientists, naturalists, historians. They knew they were making history, and they wanted to document it as accurately and thoroughly as possible. And finally, after months of struggle, they emerged from the wilderness back to the familiar world of St. Louis. I can only imagine the feeling of relief, the joy of seeing familiar faces sleeping in a real bed. What was the reaction like? Were they hailed as heroes?
I would think so. They had achieved something extraordinary, something that had never been done before. They had crossed the continent, mapped unknown territories, encountered new cultures, and returned with a wealth of knowledge and experience.
The source describes their return as a moment of national celebration. People were eager to hear their stories, to see the maps and artifacts they brought back. They were pioneers in the truest sense of the word, and their journey captured the imagination of a nation eager to expand westward.
But as we've seen in our deep dive, their story is much more than just a triumphant march across the landscape. It's a story of resilience, of adaptation, of cultural encounters, both peaceful and tragic. It's a reminder that history is rarely simple or straightforward, and that there are always multiple perspectives to consider.
What strikes me is how, even with all the journals, maps, and artifacts, there are still mysteries surrounding the expedition. We'll never know everything they experienced, every thought that crossed their minds, every challenge they faced. And that's part of what keeps history so compelling, isn't it? That sense of wonder, the unanswered questions that invite us to keep exploring, keep digging deeper.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Lewis and Clark expedition, I'm curious what surprised you most about their journey, what resonated with you, and if you could travel back in time and ask them one question, what would it be? Keep those thoughts simmering as you continue to explore the endlessly fascinating world of history.
Until next time, happy exploring.